The dust hung heavy in the morning air, that kind of pale haze that comes when the sun is not yet cruel but promises to be before noon. Boards creaked beneath boots, wagons rattled, and the old square was already swollen with bodies. Farmers, drifters, traders, all circling the rough pine platform that had been built not for speeches nor music but for something meaner. The sound of men's voices rose in jagged bursts, laughter that cracked like a whip, and under it the murmurs of women clinging to shawls and whispering behind gloved hands. It was the day a soul was to be weighed like grain and sold for the highest bid, and the crowd had come to see. She stood there barefoot, 19 years only, but her bones already carried the weariness of one much older. Eliza May Carter, thin as winter stalks, pale as unbleached linen, the smell of iron clinging to her dress though she had scrubbed it raw the night before. Her belly was flat now, but her body still remembered the hours of labor that had nearly broken it. Blood had not yet fully left her, and weakness trembled through her legs, though she held herself upright with a kind of stubborn quiet. Her eyes, gray like storm water, stayed fixed on the boards beneath her feet, for she had long learned that looking at men's faces only brought harsher words. The auctioneer's voice, slick with cheer, carried above the crowd. Here we have her, strong enough yet, not past her prime. A body that can serve a house, or a field, whichever suits. Who'll start? His gavel struck, and the bidding began, numbers tossed out with the ease of throwing dice. A man in a wide hat called $2, another raised $3, laughter ringing out at the low figure. Someone shouted about her frailty, about how she was ruined before she'd begun, and still the numbers crept, though each offer was less about her worth and more about the mockery of her being. Eliza did not cry. She had done her crying alone, in the straw of a shed where her child had been taken from her hands before the dawn. What filled her now was not tears but a hollowing, a vast space inside her that no one seemed to notice. She had grown used to the cruel mathematics of survival, where a woman's body could be tallied like cattle, her fate sealed by the highest voice in the crowd. And then, from the edge, a man stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not grin or push through as the others did. Silas Boone, they called him, though few spoke his name in jest. 32 years and broad in the shoulders. He carried silence as though it were armor. A scar cut along his jaw, faded but permanent, giving his face the look of stone weathered by storms. He had ridden in late, his horse lathered, and now he stood with his hat low, watching her with eyes the color of smoke. When the bids wavered, when the jeers turned sharper, Silas lifted his hand. 5. The word was plain, no flourish, no drunken slur of humor. It cut clean through the noise. A pause spread, the men looking at one another, some amused, some confused. The auctioneer called for more. None answered. It was not that $5 was high, but that Boone's stillness had ended the game. No one wished to push against him. The gavel fell. Sold. Eliza felt her breath catch. She had been bought, and the shape of her new life closed around her like iron bars. She followed where he led, the eyes of the town on her back, voices muttering, "Boone'll take his use of her, sure as the sun." She braced herself for it, her body stiffening, though weakness made her stagger. He said nothing, only guided her toward the waiting wagon. At the step, she faltered, her legs near giving way. A shadow fell over her, his hand extended, not grasping, not pulling, only waiting. She looked at it, at the calloused palm, and for a moment the world tilted strangely. Still, fear guided her, and she climbed without taking it. He set the reins, and the wagon rolled out of the square, leaving behind the voices that still buzzed like hornets. The road stretched long, lined with dry grass bending in the breeze. The sky above seemed endless, pressing down in its blueness. Eliza sat rigid, expecting words, expecting demands, but none came. Boone kept his eyes forward, his hands steady on the reins. At length, he drew a tin cup from beside him, filled it from a skin, and offered it over. She hesitated, watching, half expecting a trick. But thirst pressed her throat, and she sipped, the water cool, trickling down like mercy itself. Her voice, hoarse from silence, finally asked, "Why?" But he gave no answer beyond a steady glance, then looked back to the road. They reached the cabin as the sun bent low. It was not large, not fine, but the wood was solid, the porch swept clean. A smell of pine lingered from cut boards stacked neatly nearby. Boone halted the wagon, lifted the provisions first, then turned to her. She climbed down slow, feeling the ache in her limbs. He opened the door, and she stepped inside. The room held a bed in the corner, quilt folded with care, a table with 2 chairs, a shelf lined with jars. Simple, yes, but it breathed of order, of quiet living. Boone set her satchel, pitifully small, on the bed. "You'll sleep here," he said, his voice even, carrying no weight beyond the words. Then, rolling a blanket, he lay it near the hearth and settled himself upon the floor. Eliza froze, confusion slipping through her fear. She had braced for hands upon her, for the kind of claim men felt their coin entitled them to. Yet none came. Boone lit a lamp, the flame soft against the gathering dusk. He moved about the room with measured ease, setting a kettle, tending the fire. She stood uncertain, her body trembling not from pain alone but from the strangeness of it. That night she lay beneath clean sheets, the fabric rough but warm. Her eyes stayed open, staring at the timber beams above. She listened for his movements, waiting for the inevitable moment when kindness would prove a mask. Yet all she heard was the slow breath of a man already surrendered to sleep upon the floor. Her heart beat fast, then slower, then steadier, as the minutes stretched. The world had not broken her yet, though it had tried. And in that cabin, for the first time in longer than she could reckon, the knife she always waited for did not fall. She held on to that silence, fragile and trembling, and in the hush before dawn, a question pressed inside her. What manner of man buys a woman not to take, but to leave untouched? The answer did not come, not yet. But the question was enough to carry her through the night, and into whatever tomorrow would bring. The days settled into a rhythm, though Eliza May still kept her guard drawn tight as barbed wire. Morning light spilled over the prairie, seeping through the cabin's cracks, warming her skin even as she pulled the quilt higher, waiting for the sound of boots on the floorboards. Silas Boone rose before dawn each day, his movements quiet, his presence steady as the ticking of a clock. He did not rouse her, did not demand she stir, only stepped outside to meet the work waiting in the fields and corrals. Through the small window she would sometimes glimpse him, broad shoulders bent to the axe, arms steady as he split logs, or leading horses across the corral, his low voice soothing the restless animals. He seemed carved from patience, a man whose strength did not need proving. Yet Eliza's fear lingered. Every kindness felt like the stillness before a storm. She kept to herself, moving slow through the room, careful not to take more than was given. Her body was still tender from birth, her steps unsteady, but she forced herself to sweep the floor, to set the table, though Silas never asked. The silence between them stretched long, filled only by the crackle of firewood or the drip of water from the kettle. Each time she braced for words that never came, each night she lay awake expecting a hand on her shoulder, a demand she could not refuse. But he remained on the floor, blanket folded neat, his form a quiet shape in the dim glow of the embers. One morning she found a loaf of bread on the table, its crust still warm, a small dish of honey beside it. A single wildflower, pale purple, leaned from a chipped jar. She froze at the sight, suspicion rising swift. No man offered sweetness without a price. She waited all day for the catch, for the sudden shift when gentleness became claim. But evening came, and Silas returned with dust on his boots, only nodding at her before washing at the basin. He ate without pressing her, and when the lamp was lowered, he lay down again upon the floor. The unease inside her bent into something stranger, confusion and the first tremor of wonder. The townsfolk were not as quiet. On his trips for supplies, whispers followed them both. Eliza walked once to the mercantile, shawl pulled tight, and felt eyes crawl over her. A woman muttered loud enough to hear, "Boone's keeping damaged goods." Another spat near her feet, sneering that better women had died bringing life into the world. Heat burned in her chest, not anger but shame so sharp she thought she might fold in two. That night she stayed curled in bed, tears sliding into the pillow. She feared Silas would echo those words, that he too saw her as broken, but instead he crouched by the hearth, his voice low as if speaking to the flames. "Their words don't write your worth," he said, nothing more. Yet those 6 words sank deeper than all her tears, stirring a warmth she did not know how to hold. Still, doubt lingered. One evening as the kettle hissed, she finally forced the question past her lips. "Why did you buy me?" Her voice cracked, the words heavy with weeks of silence. He looked at her, long and searching, the lamplight tracing the scar along his jaw. At last he said, "Because you weren't theirs to own. Nothing more. No claim, no demand." And she broke then, quietly, tears sliding as her hands shook. Yet no hand reached to take advantage. He left her space to cry, his stillness a shelter she could not yet name. Storm clouds gathered over the prairie as autumn pressed near. One night the heavens split, lightning clawing across the sky, thunder rolling like distant drums. Rain came hard, lashing against the roof, seeping through cracks in the boards. Horses screamed in the corral, wild with fear. Silas rose at once, pulling on boots, striding into the storm. Eliza watched from the window, heart pounding as he fought to calm the animals, his frame lit in flashes of silver light. He moved with surety, yet the fury of the storm did not yield. When he stumbled, dragged by a frightened mare, she cried out though he could not hear. Minutes stretched, then he collapsed near the fence, rain beating down, his body refusing to rise. Without thought, Eliza flung open the door, bare feet sinking into mud, hair whipped by the wind. Pain screamed through her body, still tender from her ordeal, but she reached him, gripping his arm, pulling with what strength remained. Inch by inch she dragged him inside, her breath ragged, her gown plastered to her skin. She shut the door against the storm, then fell to her knees beside him. He was conscious but weak, his skin cold from the rain. She fetched blankets, stripped off his soaked shirt, covered him, her hands trembling not from fear but urgency. By the fire's glow she tended him, pressing cloth to his wounds, smoothing hair from his forehead. For the first time her care was not born of fear or debt, but of something she barely dared to name. When his hand shifted near hers, she did not pull away. Their fingers brushed, lingered, and in the hush between thunderclaps their eyes met. Her voice, soft, shook with truth. "You gave me breath when I thought I was gone." His answer came slow, each word carrying weight. "Then keep it. It's yours alone now." The storm raged on outside, but in the cabin there was only quiet, the kind that did not press, did not wound, but held. By dawn the rain eased. Light spilled gold over the drenched prairie, catching on drops that clung like jewels to every blade of grass. Eliza stepped outside, the air sharp and clean, her body steadier than it had felt in weeks. She lifted her face to the sun, and for the first time in memory she did not feel the weight of shame dragging her down. Behind her, the cabin stood, smoke curling from the chimney, the place that had given her not ownership, but shelter. She knew the world would still judge, tongues would still wag, yet something inside her had shifted. She was not a commodity, not ruined, not broken. She was alive. The old narrator's voice rose once more, quiet as prayer. "I have seen fortunes made and lost, have seen land change hands and cattle driven till the earth gave out. But no treasure I ever knew matched the sight of a soul lifted from the dust. Sometimes, the gentlest hands are not the ones that claim us, they are the ones that set us free." And with that, Eliza stepped forward into the morning, her heart carrying the weight not of fear, but of a freedom she had thought forever lost.